Good evening and welcome to America is Talking. I'm your host, Cindy Drucare. Today, the Pennsylvania State Legislature held a public hearing on election issues and irregularities. What did they learn and what happens next? And the holidays are upon us. 'Tis the season retailers usually count on for sales. What are they expecting this year? We'll find out. At the request of Pennsylvania Republican Senator Doug Mastriano, the state's Senate Majority Policy Committee today held a public hearing to discuss election issues and irregularities. For 3.5 hours, President Trump's legal team, headed by former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani and senior legal advisor Jana Ellis, brought forward witnesses to give their testimony on a wide range of irregularities that they themselves observed. Similar hearings are scheduled to be held in Arizona and Michigan. Joining us tonight to discuss what we heard today is Lindsay Doering. He's the Republican leader of Philadelphia's 8th Ward. Lindsay, welcome.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming. So you watched the hearings today from start to finish. What was the biggest impression you had from it?
Well, I was personally not surprised by what I saw today. I worked the polls that election and I worked the canvass afterwards at the convention center here in Philadelphia. I witnessed many of the actual incidents that were presented today. My impression is that if anybody has any doubts about the presence of actual evidence of voting irregularity, they should watch these hearings. Watch them in Pennsylvania. I'm sure they're in other states too. We have introduced the level of complexity into the election process over the last couple of years that has invited this kind of irregularity.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that struck me most. It just built a picture of kind of chaos and complexity that people on the ground didn't know exactly what to do. Is that new this year because of new machines and the volume of mail-in voting, or is that normal?
Well, a normal election doesn't have the same level of upheaval as this one did. But it does have, on a good day, prior to all the quote unquote innovations and reforms that we've brought into the system, prior to that, it was a complicated process. There is an enormous amount of law that goes on election day, and we rely on a lot of institutional knowledge, and frankly, we rely on a lot of comedy and goodwill between the parties to actually make the election day go off without a hitch. When the comedy and goodwill between the parties breaks down, and when you introduce an enormous amount of new rules and complexity and gray areas, such as did a person mail in a ballot and now they're trying to vote, when you introduce these gray areas, you get what you got earlier in November. You get what you got on November 3rd of this year, which is people seeing a window of opportunity to do the wrong thing.
So I want to get into some of the specifics, but since you mentioned this sort of comedy and goodwill or less of it this year, I understood you sort of experienced that personally. What did you experience?
Well, we were discussing earlier, I did work the canvass at the convention center, and we were working extraordinarily long hours. I was on my feet, and I was, of course, wearing a mask, as is ordered by the mayor. Now, periodically, because I have high blood pressure, I would pull my mask off slightly so that I could take a breath. That came to the attention of the Democrats who were monitoring me, because I, as a Republican, was there to monitor the canvass. The Democrats were there to monitor my activities. They then reported that to the commissioners. A commissioner's representative came down and ejected me from the convention center at the behest of the Democrats.
Wow, and that was it? You weren't allowed back after that?
My credentials were pulled and I was not allowed back in.
Wow. And you were saying earlier too that this sort of anonymity or tension with the electoral commissioners is also new.
It's absolutely new, and in fact, I helped get one commissioner in particular elected to that position, and I did that working with my Democrat counterparts here in the 8th Ward. I do the ground level work on election day, and I've always had a relatively good experience with people in the 8th Ward of both parties, and I still, for the most part, still do. But the message coming out of commissioner's office at the canvass and leading up into this election was adversarial. They wouldn't even send me my poll watcher certificates. They sent them to the Democrats to give to me. So they've gone non-communicative with the Republican Party in the 8th Ward of Philadelphia. And that's outside of my normal experience.
So what kind of message does that send to you? Because, as I was watching the hearing, I was reflecting, there's one picture of sort of chaos and complexity, and maybe, that's just what happened. But then there's another picture of sort of willfully excluding Republicans and, obscuring things. So how do you feel about that?
Look, nobody thinks that elections were perfect in Philadelphia going into this. In fact, it was known to be a jurisdiction that had considerable election day problems, and you could even put a percentage on it. And we've known about this for years. We've had basically interventions from Harrisburg, but on election day there was never pettiness or any adversariality. Because the fraud that was going on there were ways it was happening. People tried to stop it. It was generally absentee ballots, which were basically being harvested in senior centers and things like that. But there was not an adversarial situation. The idea that the Republican Party was being blocked from going into some of these places where that were the walk-in centers is just patently that's patently trying to create an opaque situation, a place where people cannot monitor. I mean, it's on its face suspicious.
Right, and it's hard. Has there ever been an answer for that?
Well, the ruling was against the Trump campaign, and that actually was relatively earlier in the process. I think that was a month out from Election Day or something like that, because people were apparently allowed to go into these walk-in centers and vote prior to Election Day. So, I mean, you start off. This is. I don't know the answer to. I didn't read the actual opinion, but I know it went against Trump. But it was part of a pattern, which is to obfuscate what is election day, when it starts and when it ends. And when you have when you try to broaden the window, and I think Trump won one of those cases having to do with mail-in ballots that were received after election day or something to that effect. When you create these gray areas, it again just creates an opportunity for litigation. And if the election can get bogged down in litigation, then that works to the advantage, obviously, of people who are trying to act improperly.
And possibly just sort of run out the clock until the deadline.
Run out the clock has been it's been the theme. And in fact, one of our commissioners here said, "Well, we've got a deadline on thus and such day, and nothing's going to get in between us and that deadline." Well, why would the commissioner be so concerned about the deadline? I think you'd want to just have a fair election.
Right. So on to some of the specifics, and I know you witnessed at least one of them. So one of the issues were these drop-off, what should be just ballot. There was more going on there than that. Can you explain what the controversy was around those?
Well, on election day, I was working with the Trump legal team. Now, we were not allowed into these walk-in centers, but we had people outside of them who were in monitoring from a public space. And for example, at the end of election day, the ballots are supposed to be picked up by a sheriff and delivered to a place where they are secured. But this is one of the chain of custody issues. I have tape, and I took a statement from one of our people who witnessed a civilian pull up in a car, not a sheriff's car, just a regular car, walk out with a bag that looked like a bag that you store that they put into a car and then drove off. So we've got pictures of this guy. And we've got a film of the car driving off. And to my knowledge, that the witness to that has given an affidavit, and I believe that is part of Mr. Giuliani's case that he's bringing on behalf of the president, along with other attorneys. And so this is what's called a chain of custody issue. When you have an issue about who's controlling the ballot at any given time, it's a chain of custody issue. This is a classic chain of custody issue because we don't know where those ballots went. I could tell you, what the walk-in center was. This is all part of a complaint, but we don't know what happened after that.
And there were also, it was raised a bunch of, there were stories of people, getting kicked out or not allowed in to observe, too far to see anything. And then there was some data that was raised that was sort of anomalies, like 1,500 ballots that arrived before they were mailed, or that the voters, recurring voters numbers were much smaller than people who hadn't voted in 20 years in a certain county. Do you think those are normal kind of anomalies? If you were to look, you would find them any year, or special this year?
Well, absolutely not. First of all, we're in a new territory right now. We're dealing with ways of voting that we've never had. And in fact, a judge ruled today on a case that was brought where Act 77, which allowed basically vote by mail for any reason, that presents constitutional problems because the Pennsylvania Constitution is fairly specific on who can vote and who can't vote. And Act 77 did not change the Constitution. So we're in a new world as far as the types of voting that we're seeing right now. But the big issue that came out today that I was not aware of was the number of ballots that were applied for is, I think, somewhere along it's hundreds of thousands less than were actually voted. So that's not normal just under any circumstances. We don't have any precedent for that in Pennsylvania because we've never done it before. But you're right. A lot of these numbers don't add up, and the people are rightfully upset about it.
Yeah, well, we have to wrap up here. There's, I invite any viewer to go watch the hearing if you're interested. There was a lot of testimony and evidence, and Mayor Giuliani said there was obviously a lot more affidavits than, witnesses that they could bring forward. So we have to wrap up here. Thanks so much for joining us today, Lindsay, and I hope you'll come back.
Thank you, Cindy. Good to be here.
Have a good night. And coming up after the break, what do retailers think this holiday season will bring? We'll find out. But first, here's America Q&A.
Reasonably closely, yeah.
Honestly, I try to stay away as possible from the news. We have so much going on with social media itself. I believe it's very toxic right now, and a lot of people are feeding into it. And I try to stay away as possible to keep my mind fresh and keep my mind pure.
Fairly closely.
Yes. In this climate, absolutely.
Not very close.
I guess check the news every, couple of days. So not, too closely, but every once in a while.
Very closely.
Pretty extremely closely, especially nationally and then also in Texas and Oklahoma.
I guess as close as I need to in order to make decisions for myself. When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format, where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled, and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
And welcome back. Most retailers count on the holiday season, which starts on Black Friday, for sales. In 2020, everyone is forced to do most things differently. So what are they doing differently, and what do they expect from this holiday season? Joining us tonight are three guests from wildly different industries. We have Charles Gridley. He's the owner of Six Bridges Brewery in Georgia. And we have Austin Germain, the general manager of Jaguar Land Rover of Easton in Ohio. And Anne Pham, she's the organizer of a vegan market that took place last year anyway in New York, Montreal, and Toronto. Welcome, everyone.
Glad to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Why don't we start with you, Austin? Normally, Black Friday and the holiday season, what does that mean to the car business, car industry?
Well, traditionally in years past, Black Friday is always a major part of our fourth quarter push and a big part of our retail revenue for that year. But if we've learned anything in 2020, it's that what happened last week or next week is not always guaranteed. So for us as an industry, we just had to be extremely nimble and be able to pivot very quick, which us being a very digital organization and doing a lot of our retail digitally to begin with, this has actually fit more in our wheelhouse than in years past. So we're very excited.
Really? So people are buying cars without test driving them? Is that what's happening?
If I didn't see it myself every day, I wouldn't believe it either. But more and more people are doing that. With the amount of reviews online, the amount of research that people do, average being 18 hours before the customer even steps in a showroom, the amount of showrooms that they had been visiting up to this point in time has been decreasing year after year. And so now it's almost 1-to-1. So they buy a car and they step into one showroom. And for us, it works very, very well.
Wow, that's very interesting. So Anne, how about you? You were running a Christmas market the last couple of years. I guess all the Christmas markets are canceled. I know in New York they're all canceled here. So what are you doing this year?
Well, I mean, I tried to wait to the very last minute to see if we could actually hold an in-person event, but that's just not looking like any possibility. So finally, I decided to do a virtual edition this year. So basically, we're going to have a virtual Christmas market for Toronto and Montreal. So we're having everything basically through a website, and visitors are able to just visit the website, see what products are being offered online. I do encourage our vendors to make videos just so they can make it more personal and we have more of the personal experience with the buyers. Basically, people are going to be shopping online through our website. That's how we'll have to do it this year.
But a big part of your market is food. So how's that going to go?
Yes, well, a big part of our Christmas market, and people like visiting Christmas markets. They can touch everything, they can taste everything. That's the big highlight of the Christmas market. But this year, given the restrictions, we just have to make do with what we have. So we encourage our vendors to post a lot of pictures, make videos, make everything very visual, basically, just to have that experience as real as possible given the circumstances. And I'm positive it's going to be still a very unique experience. It'll be different, but it'll still be very interesting and fun. It'll be interactive.
I guess you'll learn a lot from the experience. So Charles, you own a brewery, so you can't do things digitally. People are going to have to go drink beer at your establishment. So how are things looking for you? How will this year compare to last?
It is a little bit below what we did last year because we've reduced the capacity for people to come into the brewery and enjoy our products there. The advantage we do have is that our products are out in the market at various restaurants or in package stores, so they can get our product there. We've been able to maintain a very good COVID protocol in our facility, so when people come, they recognize that we're following all the guidelines that our government, our state government is advocating, and we get positive feedback on that. So we feel very good that when somebody comes to the brewery, we have a very good experience. We do some online sales for our limited releases, something that we don't put out in distribution, so that's become another tool in our tool belt and able to reach out and satisfy our customers' needs.
Okay, I was going to ask you that. And are you selling nationwide or just in the Georgia area, or just in Georgia?
Well, just in Georgia. We're only 2 years old. In fact, we're right in the middle of our 2-year anniversary right now.
Happy anniversary.
Normally thank you. Normally it would be just one great big weekend, but we've decided to stretch it out over 4 weeks. So it's a drawn out process so that we can put all the activities and fun products out there and spread it out so that everybody doesn't have to come on one day. They can come over several weekends or pick a weekend to do that. So